Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Mondays with Michele video. This week is about creating and formatting both footnotes and endnotes. We'll also talk about the pros and cons of each option so that you can decide what best suits your document. Let's get started. And for those of you who aren't familiar with both terms, footnotes are those references that are at the bottom of the page. Endnotes are those same references that you might decide to put at the end of the document, or if you are using section breaks to separate your book into chapters, you can choose to put those references at the end of each chapter. So let's take a look at how you create these footnotes. And I am going to give this document to you as a handout. I'll have a link to it in the video. So I do have step-by-step procedures. I'll walk through them with you. So the first thing you're going to do if you want to create a footnote is to click in your document where you want that footnote reference to be. So for instance, in my paragraph that's labeled "Let's Practice," if I decide I wanted to put a footnote reference right after this phrase that ends with the word fighting, I would click at that point. I go to the References menu, and what I'm going to do first, since this is the first footnote I'm creating, I'm going to click this little arrow in the box at the bottom right corner of the footnotes section, and it will open up a footnote and endnote dialog box, which allows me to set my defaults. So I could choose to put my footnotes at the bottom of the page or immediately below the text. I'm going to let it default to bottom of the page. If I was using a document that had more than one column set for the layout, I might want my footnotes to be only in the column, not stretching across the whole page. Normally, you would want the footnote to stretch across the whole page, so I would leave it as one column. I can decide the numbering format. It could be numerical starting at 1. It could be alphabetical lowercase, alphabetical uppercase, so you have a lot of choice. I'm going to leave it defaulting to number format. I want my footnote references to start at 1 and then count up continuously. And normally I would probably want to apply this to the whole document. In this case, I do have section breaks set, so I'm going to apply it to the whole section. Once I've got those settings, I would click apply. I could also just click insert to create your footnote, and you'll notice it is placed a 1 right after the word fighting, and it's created a reference at the bottom of the page with that same number. So I can now type in the text of my footnote. I could say, "This is my footnote with more information." Now, let's say I wanted to add a second footnote. Because I've already defined the settings for my footnotes, all I have to do is click in my text where I want this new footnote to appear. So let's say I want to add reference information about this particular town in France. So if I click at the end of the town's name, And all I have to do is go back up to my reference tab, which I have open, and click Insert Footnote. And you'll notice what it's done is it's labeled this particular reference as 1. And it has renumbered the other footnote after the word fighting as 2, because this new reference I'm creating appears earlier in the paragraph. So I can now go down to the bottom where that reference number 1 is for the footnote and type in the information. This is my first footnote. And I've now created 2 footnotes. The computer has automatically renumbered and reorganized them so the footnotes appear in the same order that the references appear within my text. So that's how you would create footnotes. Now, sometimes it can be difficult to locate the footnote references within your text because these numbers are pretty small, and especially if your font is not a large point size, it can be difficult to find them. So a handy feature, again, under the Reference tab, is this Next footnote. If I click on the drop down, I can find my footnotes by using the Next and Previous Footnote command. So if I go Next Footnote, it brings me to that word where I typed my first reference. If I click Next Footnote again, let's do it again. Now it's brought me, you notice the cursor is sitting right after the word fighting. And if I click Show Notes, the cursor is flashing right beside the associated text that goes with that footnote that I was using. So that's how you can locate your footnotes. And what if you want to delete your footnote? Basically, you are going to locate the reference number of the footnote in your text. So if I click right in front of this little 1 where I've placed my footnote reference and delete, do you notice it has removed the footnote that I had written down below, and it has renumbered my only remaining footnote after the word fighting. It's renumbered it to 1 and corrected the numbering for the associated text. So again, to delete a footnote, you don't delete it down at the bottom here. You just delete the reference number in your text block, and that takes care of deleting the linked details. So we've talked about creating footnotes, finding footnotes, deleting footnotes. What if we want to change the style of our footnotes? Because the default font and size might not be what you want. I know most programs will make the footnotes quite a bit smaller in terms of the font size. I find I actually prefer having them in a font size that's closer to my text so I can easily read them. So instead of manually going in and changing the font size to something that is more appropriate, or maybe changing the font itself, I might want to change the style so that every single footnote that I create will automatically be formatted the same way. This is what I would do. First, I would click somewhere in the text of my footnote at the bottom of the page. Word has two predefined styles covering your footnotes. There is one style covering the footnote text. There is another style for the footnote reference number. So if I now go to my home menu, and you'll notice in this list of styles up top, if I was to enlarge this window, there is no style that is labeled footnote, footnote text, footnote reference. That's because these styles are hidden by default. So what I want to do is click on this little arrow in the lower right corner of that styles section of the home menu. And that brings up this styles dialog box. And you notice it's automatically selected that footnote text style because I clicked in my footnote text. So it's showing me that that particular phrase already has a style applied called footnote text. What I can do now is click on this little symbol that's the Manage Style symbol. It's got the letter A with a little pencil. If I click on that, it brings up this detailed box that allows me to make changes to my settings for the footnote text style. And again, you'll notice that footnote text is the style that is highlighted. If I click this Modify button, I'm now seeing a dialog box called Modify Style. And I might decide to change the font. Right now, it's showing up as Times New Roman. I can leave it to that. I could change it to something totally different, but for now, I'll leave it to Times New Roman. I could change the font to 11 point. I could change the color. Let's make the color this lovely rust color. And I'm going to click OK. Right now, I've set these changes to be only in this document. I'm going to click OK. Click OK again. And it has updated all of my footnotes with that new formatting. If I wanted to make a change to the reference number, you notice the minute I select that little reference number, the style window is showing I now have the footnote reference style selected. Similarly, I could go in. This time, I'm making changes to the footnote reference style. I click Modify, and again, I could go in and make changes. So I'm not going to bother. I find usually it's the footnote text that you would probably want to modify, not the reference number so much. So we've talked about how to create the footnotes, how to find them, how to delete them, how to change our styles. Let me show you what it looks like if you've created references with a multi-column document like I did here. This is an excerpt from my grandfather's World War I diary. So I created some references, footnotes here. I created one here. I created one here. And as you can see, it's put those references at the bottom of the page. And I find these bottom of the page footnotes are really handy for providing additional information on what you have already written about on the page. So for example, when I first read my grandfather's diary, he referred to receiving a blighty. I had no idea what he was talking about. So for North Americans, I thought it would be really handy to put in this information that blighty referred to a wound, which was serious enough to get you shipped back home to Britain. And again, adding in information, he talks about having trench fever. So I put in a little bit of information about trench fever. So footnotes can be used to add information that you don't want to just type into the middle of your narrative. In this case, this is my grandfather's diary. I don't really want to interrupt his entries with clarifying comments from me, so I chose to put those in as footnotes. So let's talk now about endnotes. The process to create endnotes is very similar. If I decide I want to create an endnote reference for this particular city, I would click on it. I go to my References tab, and this time I'm going to say Insert Endnote. And it has created an endnote reference. New endnote. Now you'll notice the numbering sequence is different. If I click on that footnote and endnote dialog box, that little arrow in the bottom of the footnote section, this is showing me now how my endnotes are formatted. And you notice it's defaulting to a different numbering scheme. It's using Roman numerals. So this gives me the ability to have both footnotes and endnotes in the same document. But the formatting of these endnotes is not my lovely red text, because there are separate styles that control endnotes. It is endnote text and endnote reference. So if I want my endnote text to also be a different font and a different color, I have to go in and modify them, just like I did for my footnote text. So I'm going to change the font to Arial. I'm going to make it 11 points. And for my endnotes, let's make them, instead of the red color, let's choose a dark blue just for purposes of demonstration so I can show the difference. So my endnotes are now showing up as blue, and they are at the very end of the document. As you can see, we're at the final page of the document. So this endnote reference was way back, yes, on page 5. But it's put that endnote reference at the end of the document. So you might be asking yourself, which should I use, footnotes or endnotes? And it comes down to personal preference. It comes down to what your purpose is for the document you're creating. So footnote advantages, as I showed you, it's a great way to give extra information to clarify references in your document text, like when I put the explanation of what the word blighty meant. The other advantage is the person reading your document has both your narrative and any of those associated references or sources on that same page. The disadvantage is footnotes rob space from the writing area of your document because they are located above your footer area, which has the page number. So the more footnotes, the more footnote references you are making on that page, the less available space you have to actually write your story. And what I find is if I'm reading a document and there are 40 lines of footnotes and only 10 lines of story, I find that to be a bit distracting. The advantage of endnotes is if you are using it primarily to list the sources that you have used for your narrative, then putting that information at the end of the chapter or at the end of the document means it's not going to distract your reader, and it maximizes the space that you've got available on the page to actually write the story. The disadvantage, if somebody does want to look and see what that reference number was referring to, you're forcing them to flip potentially a lot of pages if it's at the end of the document. So there's a lot of this flipping back and forth to figure out what that reference number referred to. Sometimes the one way may be preferable depending on the purpose of your article. So for instance, if I was submitting an article that was a case study and it was being peer reviewed by other genealogists who want to know what is the source I use to support every one of those facts, it would make sense to have those references at the bottom of the page so that they wouldn't be constantly flipping back and forth to see which source my reference is referred to. But if I was intending this document to be for my family to read, I would probably use footnotes for the extra explanation for terms they might not be familiar with. And I would use endnotes at the end of the document to actually list, here are all of the sources that I used to support the different things I mentioned in the article. So the nice thing is, it doesn't have to be an either or. You can actually use both. But if you find you've set up footnotes and then you decide really they should have been endnotes, or you created them as endnotes and decide, oops, I think I really want them as footnotes. The good news is you can easily change them from one to the other with just the click of a mouse. And I'll show you how. So here is the endnote we created. All I have to do is select that endnote. And if I now want to turn it into a footnote, just right click and select Convert to Footnote. And it has put this endnote as a footnote right here. It has set the appropriate numbering so that it is in sequence. and it has placed it on the same page where I created that EndNote reference originally. If I want to change maybe just these two footnotes and make them endnotes, I select them, I right-click, and I say convert them to endnotes. It's removed them from this page, and if I scroll to the end of my document, it's now placed them at the end of the document. It's renumbered them according to the EndNote numbering scheme. And if I go back to where I originally created them, you'll notice it's changed those references to Roman numerals to match the EndNote numbering scheme. So Word gives you a lot of flexibility for working with footnotes and endnotes. And even if you decide halfway through the process that you want to change what you chose and make your endnotes into footnotes or footnotes into endnotes, it's easy to do. I hope you enjoyed this week's video on footnotes and endnotes. I have included a handout with step-by-step instructions so that you can practice the techniques I demonstrated. You'll find the link in the video description at the bottom of your screen. Thanks for watching.